just a couple things. So now I've gotten some work from you guys. I've gotten a little bit more familiar with what you're doing. And, believe it or not, after today, we're going to be a third of the way through the semester, which is like, we're still in September, right? Because we've had classes starting in August. So this is the 5th class. So I'm hoping that you're learning stuff and I'm not just, wasting your time with this. But a couple of things that I've noticed, everybody's doing fine. You're doing well. And while I'm not going to be grading you on production values for your assignments, a couple of things that you should be aware of if you're handing me in a piano piece, right? And that is something called voicing. And it should be this way if you're handing me in a piece of music that you've created in music software, like a DAW, like GarageBand or Logic or Reaper or Pro Tools or whatever you use. And the other thing, too, I would like to say is that if you guys could type in the chat what software you're using to produce music. Are you using, a notation program like Sibelius or Finale, or are you using a DAW? And then that will give me a good feel for who's doing what. So if I'm playing something on the piano, right, I'm not playing... Right, I'm playing... So you can hear the melody singing out, right? So a lot of times on your demos that I'm getting from you, even in notation software, you should really work at trying to make sure that the melody stands out. There are ways that you can do that, but if you have a notation software that you're using, figure out how to bring down the velocities and select those notes and bring velocities of everything but the melody down a little bit. And it's easy to do that in any DAW. You just have to go to the edit lane. That's one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing I wanted to say too is that even in a 30-second piece, your stuff is starting off at like full volume, almost everyone except for a couple, right? Like from beginning to end, it's at like full tilt. And I want you to get right I want you to start really thinking in terms of making stuff build, because when you're writing music abstract, you're mostly writing in song form. Most of you that are jazz majors, some of you that are classical, I think Daniel, you're a composition major. Is that correct? Right. So you do maybe some more different kinds of form, but most of us are used to writing in song form, and song form has to do with 4, 8, 2, like if you're a jazz major, your song form is 16 bars is 8 and 8, or it's 32 bars, it's 16 and 16, or 8, 8, 8, or if it's a 12-bar blues, it's 12 bars long. That's not how film music works. I write music in terms of the number of beats from one spot to the next. And to make the music fit in to that number of beats, it's a different skill than writing like a song form. And the other thing too is that you have this material that you're going to be working with and bringing back and reprising through the film, right? So, you may have a motive that you're using, and one cue, you may have 30 seconds to get to a certain dynamic level. And you may have that same motive, and later on in the film, there may be a lot of other stuff coming in, and you may have 2 minutes to get to the same dynamic level that you ended the first cue in 30 seconds. So how you do that and how you unfold that music over time doesn't really have to do with song form, right? And it's a different way of looking at music. It's the number of beats from one section to the next in the short form, and how long in terms of time, because film is not set to tempo, beats per minute. It's set to frames per second, and they are the same from the beginning of the film to the end. And things happen in a time that's not like, things can have a pace to it. You can have edits that are paced and they happen at a fast tempo, but the film is always going at the frame rate that it's set at the beginning. And you have to sort of make music, which is much different conception of time, fit in with that rigid frames per second, because something doesn't happen on a bar or a beat of music. It happens on a frame of action. And learning how to navigate that from the beginning to the end is a different skill than writing a 32-bar ballad, right? And you, even in these short exercises I'm having you do, you should really start focusing in on maybe seeing if you can develop some of those skills. Now, the best composers will make the stuff sound natural, right? So that you don't really notice that it's somewhat different than what we're used to. That's part of developing your skill as a composer. And, you know, it's an interesting thing, because for me personally, when I first started writing film music, I wrote much more note complex music than I write now. I used to write music where there were a lot of notes. And I thought mistakenly that was impressive. And I actually write much less notes now, but I think the music is deeper on a different level, and it fits in and is better for telling story, because at the end of the day, this whole study is about telling story and learning how to tell a story in your music, stories in sound. And all of this stuff sort of fits in together. So with that, I would like to play a pop tune for you, and we'll sort of look at it. Let's see. All right, so if I switch to my screen, let me know if there's a bad sound, and let me know how loud this is, because now it's balanced differently from what I did before. All right, so let me just play a little bit of this and let me know if the balance is good. All right, great. So I just turned that down a little bit. Now, some of the best arrangers, right? Nelson Riddle, great arranger, orchestrator. And he spent his life orchestrating pop tunes of the day, 50s and 60s. And one of the things about those songs is that they all told stories. Some of them might have actually been from a film. And he had a long, long relationship with Frank Sinatra, right? And his orchestrations are amazing in terms of storytelling. So we're going to listen to this song called "It Was a Very Good Year." Frank Sinatra is singing it. And what I was able to do here, we're going to listen to it a couple times, right? So first I'm going to play it with everything in, and then through the magic of technology, I was able to remove most of Frank's voice, and we'll just listen to the music. And what I've got here in the notation is just the notes and rough rhythm. They're not in the right spot in the beat because I didn't have a time to make a tempo map. But you'll be able to, I think, follow along perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. So let's just take this. So this is a song called "Very Good Year." And it's the same bit over and over again. And the way that he varies the orchestration as the song unfolds and tells the story, the like answering lines, there's a vocal line and then there's an answering line in the instrumentation. Not only how he changes that from verse to verse, but how he changes the music that's playing while the singing is going on. It's really a great lesson. So let's take a listen to this, and then we'll just with Frank and then without. Again, I apologize for the inaccurate rhythms.
When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17, when I was 21, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for city girls who lived up the stair with all that perfumed hair. And it came undone when I was 21.
Change to major here.
When I was 35.
Okay, so let's just take it up to that point, right? I'm going to mute Frank, and let's listen to it again.
When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17.
Okay, so in that beginning verse there,
When I was 17, it was a very good year.
if we listen to the strings, he's got very high sustained strings and fairly low sustained strings, and not a lot happening in the middle. What's happening in the middle is a broken chord arpeggio played by the harp. And the reason he's doing that is he's leaving space for the duet between Frank and the answering phrase in the woodwinds at the beginning.
17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17.
And that's really nice because what he's doing with the woodwind that's answering is it's almost like an improvisation. It's very free, but it does sort of follow the contours of what's going on with the accompaniment in the back. And why is that? Why is he orchestrating this like this? Can anybody venture a guess? So simply.
He's painting scenes.
Right. It's also the beginning of the song. Right. So what he's doing here with this, and this relates to film scoring, is that he's starting out simply and he's building, and he builds up to these crests and then comes down. And these are the kinds of activities that when you're writing film music, you have to be able to do. So he's starting off the beginning of the story. Okay, so let's see.
Summer night, we'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17.
And now an interlude. And then right there, he changes the texture. So there's no longer broken arpeggio in the harp or broken chords. There's dum, 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 dum. And the strings are doing that also. And then he's got a wind choir playing a melodic figure. So that's different than the interlude that opened the song up, a different orchestration. And it gives a completely different feel.
When I was 21.
Now, this is completely different than the first time, right?
It was a very good year. It was a very good year for city girls who lived up the stair.
All right, so he's got the first two lines here with that pizzicato business.
I was 21. It was a very good year.
And now he's going to change the texture here.
Very good year for city girls who lived up the stair.
Right, so he's got the city girls and he's got this like kind of romantic, this really beautiful romantic string line in there. So you see how he's painting a picture of the story with all the notes in this.
I was 21. It was a very good year. It was a very good year for city girls who lived up the stair with all that perfumed hair, and it came undone.
And then for the last third, so you could think of it in terms of thirds, right? The first third were the pizzicato, then the sweep up to those strings, and now these figures that like right in this area here, which are similar in a way to the woodwind figures in the first verse. In thirds, right?
And it came undone.
So that is similar to stuff like this. Right, so you see how he develops a variation of that in the next verse. So these are the kinds of things that help to paint a picture in sound. All these kinds of details like this. And then here he changes to major, which is like very dramatic sounding. But I just wanted to give you a little taste of that to just show you how you can even study popular music to see how a song the story of a song unfolds. And when you listen to stuff like this, there are a lot of principles that you can take out of this that you can incorporate into your toolbox when you're writing music for film. So, yeah. Okay, so let's see. Now, for this week, I wanted you to write five, a handful of individual cues with different motives, and each motive doing a different mood. And we're going to continue on with working with motives for this class. And then there'll be stuff in the the last third of the class where we're going to look at a film I've scored, and I'm going to start teaching you a little bit more about the practical thing of setting up a film and getting going with scoring a film, because we're going to start doing that at some point this semester. Okay, so there's a film called Shakespeare in Love, which was a big film. And it's a fast-moving romantic comedy set in London in 1593. So the layperson doesn't know that in 1593, the kind of music that was being played, that's pre-Bach. That's in the era of Renaissance music. So probably a lot of John Dowland and William Byrd, and things like that. And the music for this film actually sounds like fake Mozart a little bit, and Mozart was in the early 1800s. But for the movie audience, I think they don't really understand the difference in that time period, between those time periods. So what I would call this music is something that like period music. It's supposed to evoke a certain era in time. Like there's a movie called Ragtime that Randy Newman wrote the score for, and the music is kind of ragtime-ish, right? It's very heavily influenced by Scott Joplin, and Randy does have that technique in his toolbox anyway. If you listen to some of his piano music, he plays stuff that's sort of just a little bit after ragtime era jazz. And something like this, in the 90s, there were a lot of these period films. A lot of them seem to star John Malkovich, but this one's a little bit different. So let's take a listen to this. I don't have any films for this one. Oh, let me just see. Hold on a second. Yes, I do. Okay, so let's watch some movies. So this will be the main titles. And there is in our Dropbox, there's some sheet music for this. Yeah, let me know how the music volume is also. You could just put a text in the chat. I want to stop this. So did you hear how that whole build up? Did you know how many bars that was? Was that was that song form, that whole build up, right? And there were things that they were using in there that were very similar to what Nelson Riddle was doing. So listen to that whole build up, right? You don't know how many bars that is. It's just unfolding. I'm going to skip ahead. You get the general idea of the setting and the scene. I want to play it again and take a listen to how often the chords change, right? How often there's a harmonic change. And this will be different for some of you because you're used to playing music where right, where there's two chords in a measure, a chord every measure. Just listen to how long it takes for him to change chords here. So we're at like 32 seconds into the film, 30 seconds. Still haven't changed key or a chord. Got some melodic interest right now. Still haven't changed a chord. Still the same chord. There we go. Where's that? Let's see. So that's like 50 seconds. Right, of just unfolding and leading up to that one point. And you see how one of the arrangement techniques is to layer in instruments, right? So he's got this little ostinato figure going. It's very gentle. It's very quiet. Then the first thing you start to hear is some natural sound, people's footsteps quietly. Maybe the rustling of leaves. And that's an element in the unfolding of the opening, and it's actually sort of, you can think of it as part of the score. So these are further considerations to add into your composing, to like, when are those things going to happen and how can they enhance your score, and how do you leave space for those things to happen so that they don't turn your score down? That's another big thing. So once that happens, then we get a little woodwind entrance, and then we get like a little woodwind figure, and then there's a chord, a string thing that enters, and then finally we change chord 50 seconds later. So let's just one more time with that in mind. Right, so we've got the string, and that must be a harp. Or maybe it's marimba. Right, you got the chimes. You got that natural sound in there. And the natural sound changes with the change of the scene. Right? And he lets that come in before he brings the clarinet in. And then another chord change there. Right? Or it goes, I guess that sounds like the 5 chord. So in this whole opening, you've got 3. I'm sorry, I didn't switch to the film. That's all right. You've got 3 elements that you can bring back later in the score. You've got that ostinato, you've got that clarinet line, and then you've got the string figure. And the way that he unfolds that is beautiful. You know, it really is fantastic. Let's go a little bit further ahead in this. Okay, so, all right. So, Latoya, the natural sounds are not the job of the composer, but the chimes probably are, unless they record them. But they have to fit in with the music, right? So you didn't actually see anybody striking a chime there. So that'd be something that you'd have to write into the chart, into the music. So, right here, we're at about 5 minutes into this film, maybe like a little under that with all the logos at the beginning. And we've got more than enough material to score an entire film, right? You had that ostinato, you had the chimes, you had the clarinet line, you had that little string figure, and then there was like that little bit where they were burning his feet. That was a little bit more ominous sounding. And then you had this whole last bit, which is actually the theme, the proper theme of the film. Right there, you've got so much material right there that you can extract and score a whole film from. And it's right there in the opening. All right, let's take a look. So you could take a look at this here. Right? It's not that difficult. Right? But it's very memorable. Let's see. Right? So he's got these they're just scale fragments that make up this melody. And the way it's orchestrated makes it feel like it's a period piece. And there's just so much material here. You've got these Alberti figures that you can hear in the score. So you could definitely download this stuff and study it yourself. It's in the Class 5 folder. So let's take a look at another bit. And also there's just MP3s for you to listen to of just the music and these film clips.
And he won the Oscar for that score too.
Yeah, it's Stephen Warbeck. Yeah, he's an excellent and underrated composer. Patrick Doyle's another one who's underrated, who writes a lot of these kinds of films. So you can see that in this fight scene, since music is much more to create atmosphere. Right. So Chris, it plays it, like a fight scene. There's different kinds of fight scenes, right? There's fight scenes like where it's life and death and where things seem like it's the end of the world, like the opening to Saving Private Ryan. That's a fight scene, landing on the beach at Normandy. This is like a comedic almost fight scene. So they're really up there fighting, and there's something wrong. The guy's definitely angry that he found Shakespeare's note in with his female companions, whatever that was that broke. But this fight here is sort of like almost like it's almost jovial in a way, even though there's a lot of violence going on, and the music sort of plays more towards that and more towards the larger background, right? Because what's going on is that they're having this fight, but this is the moment where Shakespeare realizes that Gwyneth Paltrow's character is actually a woman, and he's down there and he's like, like that's his muse, right? So the theme that's in the background as to what's actually happening. It's not really about the fight, right? And then what goes on after this, where she runs away from him, and if you watch the film, you'd see some of that stuff, and then he goes chasing after her. So it's interesting about fight scenes, is right? It doesn't have to be so literally a fight scene. Let's listen to. I missed the audition. Should have been the second one. All right, let's move forward from this one onto our next one. Let's see. All right, let's move into the 1980s and the Denny Elfman's score for Batman, which, let's see, do I have the score for that? I do have piano music for that, so if I don't post it up on Dropbox, let me make a note so I don't forget. I do have piano score for that for you guys to have. It's not here. Let's see, new score for Batman on Dropbox. Let's just take a watch of this opening from that. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Ever hear that before? I mean, the whole tune is that, the whole piece is that tune, and then that that little arpeggio figure. I will tell you this, that this score was sort of changed and created a lot of copycat scores afterwards, especially like the hyperactive, over emotional. I think it's a great score, but this bigger than life stuff. And it's amazing to think that a guy who couldn't write music on paper at that point, he can now, wrote this just from using his ears. And then he had somebody come and orchestrate his sequencers tracks. So Daniel has kindly posted in the chat the suite. If you all want to download that, you can just click on it and save it on your computers. Thank you so much. Saves me from having to do it.
It's a score I found online. I don't know how.
Yeah, I have the same. I think I have the same one.
Okay.
Which I was going to upload. Now, there's one. What is so great about? What is so great about that? And works perfectly well here. Like, can you anticipate in the future how that could be used? Right? He can stretch it out like that.
Yeah, there's actually interesting that the augmented fifth is used so much in superhero stuff, because Alan, oh my goodness, what's his last name? Silvestri.
Yep.
Does it too with Marvel stuff.
It's huge, and there's one that's right? Everybody, most people probably know what that is. That's been on the air for 30 years, NFL on Fox, right? The song brief for that was they wanted Batman on steroids. Seriously, I know the people that wrote that score, that theme song, and that was the brief they got, Batman on steroids. So I don't know whether this was the first, but it's so often used, doing that. Putting that the flat six or the augmented fifth in there. Now, he uses a technique in here. Let's just listen to the. Let me do this. Escape.
It's kind of cool how the melody is also, it's kind of a bass line too.
Right,
It
exactly.
like works in all registers.
That's exactly what, yes, exactly right. Give me 1 second here. Okay, great. So let's see. All right. Let me just play a little bit of the score here without the visual. It's interesting, right? It's got that figure in there. Oh, that's right. He starts in B minor and then it ends up in D minor. That's it. That's why I was wondering, how is he playing a B minor chord? So notice how quickly that motive comes in some of these sections. Not. Yeah, so this next section here, listen to this, how this comes in, right? So what is that called when you have really quick entrances of a melodic riff like that? Like if this was in a Bach fugue, what would that be called? Daniel, do you know that? The technique?
I'm bad at remembering those techniques of the Baroque era. Sorry.
I'm less than half
I mean,
the
it's
volume
a
of everyone
fugue,
else.
so it's
Well, it would be like a stretto, right?
yeah, that's what it is.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you doing the sound. Maybe you should come over here and operate my machinery while I'm teaching the class so I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, I just turned my gain up here. All right, so I don't seem to have this issue with any of my other classes, though, with my volume. Anyway, so it's called stretto, is that bit there. And where you and this melody is short and it has all these contours that allows for it to do that kind of activity. Let's move forward a little bit to another cue. There are moments where you can hear the motive from the main theme come in. And that's clearly melodic, right? It's something you can remember. All the music between those iterations of that motive have no real melodic character to them. They're all it's just sort of like fragments of music that sort of drive what's going on underneath. And he saves the melodic character, the melodic iterations of the theme for the moments that he needs them. And then there's all that filler in between where there's no recognizable melody. There's little, and boom, boom, bum, 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 these ostinatos and all this stuff going on. Again, 4-bar phrases, 8-bar phrases. How is this structured? It's just 60 seconds worth of music, and then we have to get to this point. And how do you connect those two spots, right? From where you start to where you want that theme to come in when that scene is happening on that frame. So that's a big, big compositional technique that you need to think about. And I can show you what I do for that, but those are the kinds of things that you can only learn by doing, you know?
I have a question
Yes.
about when to stop the music. What are some things we can put in our toolboxes?
Right. So, starting and stopping of music and how the music comes in and everything is really important, right? And what I would say is that you decide when the music starts and stops with the director. And they will probably tell you when they want the music in and out. They probably thought about this, especially, and if they haven't, I don't really know what I can tell you about it, like when to start and stop, but let's look here, right? Let's just take a look at this for a second. We'll go back a little bit.
Professor, you're not sharing screen.
Thank you. Technology. That's a good spot for the music to end. That's the conclusion of that whole scene when he gets into that vat of that green stuff. So, a lot of times the start points and the end points are fairly obvious. The start points are a little bit more interesting for me, when to actually start and how to actually start. So, so we've listened to Kill a Mockingbird before. Let's
Customary.
watch a little bit of
Boy to
this,
have his father's
just to go back and forth in the different decades. Let's do Creepy Caper. So this is a mystery suspense sounding music with occasional high piano. It's reminiscent of the opening, but not a repeat or a real variation. just the sound of the instrument playing is the unifying force, right, from the opening theme. So let's just take a look at this. Okay, so what I'd like to discuss about this one is that some of the stuff that I talked about at the beginning of the class. So you could see in this particular cue that there are some references back to stuff that was in the opening theme, and that would be that little piano waltz thing. But then it went off into other directions. But again, when you look at the music and how it's constructed, it's not 4 bars or 8 bars. And there's oftentimes little gestures space, and then another gesture, and then a space, and another gesture, right? So your music doesn't have to fill up every note of every frame. Leaving space like this, and this is one reason, another way that what I've been saying about the motivic composing can really help you out, is that you can get your ideas in very quickly, and that helps to establish when characters and things come up that are important, but also when you have a situation like this where music stops, something happens, the music comes back in, it stops, it comes back in, and it works really well. And the whole scene is about,
Jim, please,
right? We first see the house, and we'll see the house, and that's at, let me just see. Right there. So that's 1 minute and 35 into this cue. And then right there at that false flag, which is four minutes. So like almost 3 minutes of time to get from when the cue starts to the part where there's that false flag where Boo Radley comes over him and the kid thinks that something's going to happen to him, but he just turns around and walks away, and then they run and skedaddle home. Right? So it's not an 8-bar or a 16-bar phrase. It's 3 minutes, about 3 minutes of music. And how do you get from point A to that point there? And that's composing. That's really what a lot of film composing is like, about. And this is when I say that it's easy to learn how to write something to picture and to get picture changes in with your music. That's one thing. Learning the language and how a film and how a scene develops, that's a completely different thing. And that's the part I think that most people need work with. And so I want to show you these examples right here where Elmer Bernstein, who composed this, he does this so expertly. And it's such a incredibly beautifully composed piece of music for a lot of reasons. All this stuff ties into what I said about at the beginning of the class about with the Batman film, with Shakespeare in Love, and with this film here. These are 3 totally different kinds of scores, but they all make use of motivic material to unify the score and to bring in recognizable elements when events happen that the director obviously deems important, right? Because they're working together, the film composer and the director. And in this particular one, what I love about the motivic aspect of composing is that you can get these ideas in, and then there's the space. And that space is actually more dramatic because there's no music in there, right? And that's something really, it takes us all as composers a long time to really feel comfortable with, hey, I don't need to fill up every second of the score with lots of notes. And even in the middle of a cue, to have like a little space can really emphasize a moment. And in this last cue, it's really becomes evident how that works. So any questions on what we've gone over so far today before we switch gears? I would highly recommend you all download the folder for this week's materials and watch the film clips, look at the score, the sheet music that I've got there for the Shakespeare in Love, and listen to the music that's in the MP3s and get the sound of that in your head. I think that would be a really useful thing. You know, you listen to a lot of classical music and jazz because most of you are jazz majors, the graduate students. Listening to this stuff is equally important to hear what the great composers have done and get the sound inside of you, because you may not sit there and analyze every note that everybody writes, but you internalize these things and you start to understand on a deeper level what the language of film music is. So we're going to move, if there's no questions on this, we're going to move off to something a little different. Open recent, let's see. All right, so does anybody know what an animatic is? A-N-I-M-A-T-I-C. An animatic is a demo for a film where they take pencil sketches of different scenes and they align them on the timeline, and then they put dialogue underneath. All right. This one that I'm going to show you now was a demo for a kids series that a director friend of mine was working on. So he thought that rather than just to send them a script, that it would be good to put together something like this to send to the Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon. I forget exactly where he sent it to. I don't know what's happening with this. But he thought that this would be much better to get over to whoever was watching this, what his vision of the film would be. So let me just switch to the screen. So this is called Faustina, and it's about a girl with superpowers, basically, a young girl. And it's pencil. The whole film is pencil drawn like this. It's not animated. It's just a drawing that goes on for a little bit, and then they move to the next drawing, and you can sort of follow the film along that way. So if I move down the timeline, right, you can see that these are just, you know, they're pretty well defined as to what the characters look like and what the action is going on. And it's a kid's comedy. So let's just, before we play it, let's just take a look at a few things. So I'm working in Pro Tools here, which not a lot of film composers work in Pro Tools, but I do. And there's many reasons for that. Mostly because I don't have the time to learn another DAW, but everybody that I work with, like, this film is going to be mixed in Pro Tools, and it's easier for me to just give Pro Tools sessions to other people. You don't need to write in Pro Tools. Most film composers don't, but you should have some familiarity with Pro Tools so that you can, it's just be easier for you to deliver your stems and your mixes that way. So I have to do, before I start writing the film score, and I've gone over this a little bit before, but this is a different style of music. I have to do something called set up my session. And what I've done here is I've put in the time code rate, all right? So that's how many frames per second. And this is 29.97 frames per second. That's typically called drop frame. Let me try to explain this really quickly. So TV in America, films are 24 frames per second, and TV is typically shot at 30 frames per second. And in the 1940s and 50s, TV was black and white. Once they started adding color to television broadcasts, they found that the image was really distorted. So what they did was every minute or period of time, instead of it being 30 frames, it would be 29 frames. And that sort of threw the video a little bit out of phase. And that they were able to transmit as accurate color. That is so Reader's Digest explanation of it. But the reason that they did this drop is when stuff was broadcast over the airwaves with antennas, so that color would be seen accurately. It wasn't in use when television was just black and white. So it's become the convention that television is typically in what's called 30 drop, and films are in 24 frames per second and sometimes 24 drop, which would be, I think it's called 23.98 frames per second. And basically what happens is that it's at 30 frames per second, and every, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 seconds, one of those 1 second of time only has 29 frames in it. So that's sort of how they work that. Now, I also have my SMPTE start time right here. All action typically starts at 1 hour or at 1 hour increments. So in the old days when you had reels of film, you could get about 10, 12, 13 minutes of film on a reel. And every reel, the time code for that reel started off at a 1 hour increment, so that the first reel of film started off at 1 hour. The second reel of film started off at 2 hours. The third reel of film started off at 3 hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we don't have reels of film, but when I work on television movies, they're typically, and I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier class, but I'm going to reiterate it because it's good to know. Television movies are broken up into acts because you have to have commercials every 10, 12, 13 minutes. So the first act typically starts at 1 hour. The second act typically starts at 2 hours. The third act, the time code should start at 3 hours. The fourth act at 4 hours. That doesn't mean you're 4 hours into a timeline. That just gives you the reference point for the beginning of that film, of that clip of film, that act, and lets you know which act it is. Act 1 starts at 1 hour. Act 2 starts at 2 hours, right? So it sort of does a dual purpose of labeling and delineating that it's different from the first hour of film. So what they have is typically pre-roll that starts before the first frame of what's called the first frame of action. And for some reason, I don't have my sub counter here. There we go. So in this film, I started this off at 59 minutes and 59 seconds. And let's just watch a little bit of this opening, and I'll make this bigger for you.
We don't see it.
Thank you. Great. So the session setup, 29.97 right here. You click this open. It's got all these different frame rates. You need to make sure that your frame rate here is the same as the film. And they will tell you that. There is a way to figure that out, which I can show you. But let's just assume that they're going to tell you that, what the frame rate is. And you ask. And here I have my session start time at 0 hours, 59 minutes, 57 seconds. I also have my sample rate of 48 kilohertz and bit depth of 24 bits. Every film the sample rate is 48K. Every film, every professional film. CD or audio work is typically done at 44.1, but film, television, video, all done at 48K. And the audio format is broadcast wave. So if you're going to write music for film, you deliver what's called a BWF or a .wav file. And that's the format that's used. Obviously, if you hand them an MP3, they can translate it into wave. But what's great about a wave file is that it has time code embedded in it. And that helps in spotting your music in the film. And that's something that we'll get into in a later class. But it actually helps. So we're starting off at 59, what I called 59.57. And it's black. And then at 1 hour, we have stuff happening. Now, typically, I want 1 hour to be the first frame of action. But right up here, he's got this thing called a BITC, B-I-T-C. Does anybody know what that means? B-I-T-C. You're going to hear somebody say that. Burnt in time code. So that's your time code window, BITC. Not Betsy, but BITC, B-I-T-C. Typically, it's down here in the bottom part of the film. But he's got it right here at 1 hour. So I wanted to make sure that my time, excuse me, my time code on my counter here and my timeline matched up with the time code that the filmmaker had in the film. And right there, he told me at 8 seconds in, the film starts in black. Is that music distorting, or is that okay?
All good.
Good. All right. Now, let me just close this for a second. There's a lot of work that goes into composing before you write a note, right? To film. I mean, you may sit there and you may write some themes away. Like, for example, I sometimes get a, wow, black. Oh, my camera must be, battery on my camera must be gone. Okay, so I sometimes get a film where I spent a couple of weeks or maybe 3 weeks writing music and recording music and creating a library for the film that they'll write, that they'll compose, cut the film to. That sometimes happens. But once I start actually composing to picture, right, I'm going to want to put all my markers in place, which are the notes that I worked out, my spotting notes. And we've gone over this before. And what's nice about Pro Tools and the markers in Pro Tools that I love so much is that they're color-coded. So they're easy to see that this is one section, this is another section. The only thing I wish is I wish I could make the ruler area in Pro Tools bigger in terms of height, but you can't do that. Right, so I go through the whole film and I mark up the whole film. And what that does is that gives me my structure. That lets me know that I have basically from the open to muffins in the oven is 12 minutes, 12 3/4 seconds, right? If I were to change that to frames, to time code, it's 12 seconds and 21 frames, right? The muffins in the oven comes in right there at 12 seconds and let's see. That's how many frames that it gets that I have to write. That's how many, that's the time code. That's where I have to start. I'm sorry, I got a little confused for a second because this film doesn't start at 0. At 1 hour, it starts at 8 seconds in or something like that. So it just confuses me a little bit, which is on the filmmaker, to be honest with you. But so this is not a number of, this is not 5 bars. This is a number of beats. Now, I happen to have picked a tempo where I can. Right? So there's a lot of information there. And then now the transition. Right? It sort of comes right in the middle of the phrase. But I worked out a nice transition into those muffins in the oven. And then there's a little space. I have the dialogue muted for a second. Okay. So the way that I wrote this was that I came up with that opening harp, the harp right here. And I tried to figure out a tempo where I could get to this point here on a downbeat, right? So it's 7 bars of writing. It ends on the downbeat of 1. So that was just a little experimentation and playing the click track and following along with the music. So if I were to turn the click on and start at 1, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 into my muffins, right? So I came up with the figure and then I just played around with the tempo. There are ways to figure out the tempo. There's this thing called the Hollywood click system. But I'm sort of not going to teach you that. I'm going to introduce you to that at some point, but nobody I know uses that now. I just basically come up with a tempo that I think works well, and then I fine tune it to get to that downbeat at the beginning of bar 8. Right?
I have a quick question about Pro Tools.
Yes.
Can you do it so that if you change your tempo, that it automatically marks or changes where your cues are set up on your score or in your line of instruments?
I can change tempo anywhere.
No, I know, but would it then automatically change where the cue ends? Because the cue is based off of the frames, right? So if you change the tempo of your music, it would change the how fast you get to your cue.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Does Pro Tools change that? If you right now change the tempo of the music, would it automatically change where the location is of the end of the cue?
Oh, in the markers?
Yeah.
Yes and no. All right, that's a good question. Let me open up a marker. If I were to have the reference be bar and beat, then this would move, the marker would move all over the place depending upon your tempo. But I set my markers up to be absolute so that it stays locked to the frame rate, no matter what the tempo is. All right, so whatever DAW you're using, you have to be able to differentiate between that. Now, let me just show you in Pro Tools, like I'm going to go, let's say I wanted a marker right here, okay? Now, if all I have to do is hit the Enter key and a marker will show up. Now, notice the reference here is automatically bar and beat, and you can change it to absolute. But if I change my time base up here in my main counter to time code or minutes and seconds, and I enter a marker, it defaults to absolute. So I put all my markers in with my counter set up to either frame or minutes and seconds. And then my markers stay locked in position no matter what the tempo is. That's a good question because you have to do that. Otherwise, you can your markers become meaningless. So you would have to see in your DAW how you would go about doing that. I'm sure it's not a feature that's unique to Pro Tools. I'm sure that you can do that in other DAWs. I just don't know how to do that in those DAWs. I'm sure it's something you could easily find out. Yes.
I was just curious, you had mentioned that not a lot of film composers use Pro Tools for composing. What's the typical program?
There are 3 programs. There are film composers that write with Pro Tools. I'm one of them. Olafur Arnalds, do you know who he is? He's from Iceland or Greenland or something like that. He writes in Pro Tools. There are a bunch of them that write in Pro Tools, but the vast majority write in one of 3 programs. They either write in Logic and not in this order: Logic, Cubase, or Digital Performer. Digital Performer has a lot of features in it that make film composing, that are beneficial to film composing. You can do things which, and I'm going to talk about this in a future class, like add streamers and punches into your film so that when you go to record, you can use those instead of a click track to make something sound more alive. And you can do that with inside of Digital Performer. Also in Digital Performer, they have these things called chunks, right? And chunks are really cool because you could have one session for an entire act and each chunk can be a cue. And they can stay separate and discrete, but use the same instruments. So you can have your template set up and then not have to import a template into each cue, and you can run the timeline off that way. And actually, most big pop shows that you see that have stage and that have stage lights and are playing the tracks and doing that, they run off of Digital Performer because you can load the entire show into one session and then just push a key on the keyboard, on your computer keyboard, to start the next song, and everything's all loaded in. So there's a guy named Michael McKnight, I think he is. He toured with, he did shows, he's done like the biggest shows of the past 30 years, the arena tours, and he uses Digital Performer. I've read a couple of articles where he talks about how it works really well for that. But most people, I'd say the Digital Performer is more older school, but most people now either use, they do use that, or they use Logic Pro or Cubase. Like Hans Zimmer and his whole crowd uses Cubase, and a lot of people I know use Logic Pro. Cubase is an amazing program. Logic is an amazing program. They all have things they do really well, but every DAW has things that they're weak at. You know, there's no perfect DAW. Yeah. All right.
You figure by this point they can get that idea, like fix the.
You know,
weaknesses.
there was a program that I used, that I learned how to do computer sequencing on, called Vision, that became Studio Vision. There's stuff, and that was in the 1990s, and then they went bankrupt after Gibson the guitar company bought them at like 1999 or 2000. There was stuff that software did that like you don't see on modern DAWs that I wish that they had. I mean, that was like such an amazing piece of software. All right, so let's move forward here, and so I've shown you guys my setup here, right? I do things like a score, and I've got all my tracks color coded. So let me make these all bigger so you can see them. I actually have right here a notation, sketch notation. These tracks are not assigned to any instrument. They're just MIDI tracks, and they've got rough notation of the entire score so that I can go back and reference when I want to. So I keep that at the top, and I don't color those tracks. But right here, from here to here, are my high woodwinds. So I've got piccolo, solo flute, alto flute, oboe, and clarinet. And then I have something here called a VCA master. And I use a VCA master as a volume control for these high winds, also so that I can solo them. And I think I might have gone over this before. So in other words, if I'm playing the score here, let's see. Let me turn off the click track. And I want to hear just the winds. I could just push that little solo button and all the winds are soloed. The other thing that they do that's really helpful as somebody who reads notation is that they separate out the different sections, instrumental groups. Like in a score, you would have a system with a little break, and then, you know, another like the winds, and then a little break, and then the brass, and then a little break, and then you would have the percussion, a little break, and the strings. And this helps me visually, right, to see things. Now, another little trick too that I want to show you, and I don't know how it is with other DAWs, but it gets very difficult to read these names here. So I typically keep my tracks list open, And this I can read because it's black text on white background. So if I want to do something with the bass clarinet, I can just click there and then the bass clarinet becomes highlighted. I know what that track is rather than me sitting 4 feet away from the screen trying to read that tiny track. Obviously, I can zoom in on these tracks and read all that stuff, but then I'm limited to seeing just a small part of the edit window. So then below that, I've got my bass, my low-pitched winds. And I like to do things where I have solo instruments. Like for here, I've got a bass clarinet and a solo bassoon. And I do that for detail, but I like to do ensemble patches. So right here, I've got high winds. And I've got low winds. The reasons for doing that, having ensemble patches, are twofold. Quicker to write with, right? But if I were to take a solo piccolo, a solo flute, a solo oboe, and a solo clarinet and write a unison line with 4 separate sampled instruments, that would sound one way. If I were to play that line with an ensemble patch, that would sound more natural, because there's something to be said about recording all those instruments at the same time in a hall, because all of these instruments are recorded in Air Lyndhurst studio, the ones that I'm using. So they've got the sound of that hall in there. And the ensemble playing together resonates the room in a different way than the single instruments do. That's one thing. And then also the other bit too is that if you're playing 4 solo instruments and lining them together, playing on unison lines with them, and those instruments have built into the sound of the rooms, they've got reverb tails on them, you're actually adding 4 times the amount of reverb that you would normally get if they were all playing in the room at the same time. So that can create issues, mud issues in the sound with like a low frequency buildup, and then you have to add high pass filters to clean that up. So that's one of the reasons why, those are some of the reasons why I like to have ensemble patches and solo patches. So the ensemble patches, quick, and they also sound different than the solo patches, and the solo patches for detail. What are the differences between VCA and aux tracks? Okay, so a VCA is a voltage controlled amplifier. Hey, Ken, can you answer that question for us? Make you work?
Well,
So
the VCA, the simple way to look at it is the VCA is like a remote control for all of the faders, whereas it's not passing any audio. It came from analog consoles, and an aux group, you're actually passing audio into another channel, so you're just routing into a through type of channel.
thank you, Ken, very much. Give me 1 second, everybody. I have to do something here. Okay, great. So my friend Ken is sitting in on these classes. He's an incredible engineer, and I've learned quite a bit from him about mixing and recording music, and I teach that stuff to you guys. So he's better at explaining these things than I am. Okay, so the aux tracks are very important for mixing, right? You can create really quick stems by having all your audio routed through aux tracks. It really works. And his lighting is killing. Okay.
I had to do some shoots here with an artist, so I had to put some lights in.
Yes, Ken and I share the nerd gene. Okay, and then below that, again, color coded, I've got, make that a little bigger, it'd be easier for you to see. I've got my high brass, right? So I've got a solo trumpet, a solo horn, and 4 horns, right? So I've got different sized, different ensemble sizes. If you were to play a chord with 4 horns and you were to play a triad, the problem with that is it sounds like 12 horns, right? You have 4 horns playing a unison note, and when you play a 3-note chord, you're getting 12 horns. So that doesn't sound really natural. So I like to have a solo horn, and I have a library called by this company, Orchestral Tools, where they actually, where they have ensemble patches for the sections. Like they've got 3 trumpets, and then they've got 4 horns, 3 trombones, and 2 bass trombones. But they also have all of those sections as individual instruments. So they've got trumpet 1, trumpet 2, trumpet 3, horn 1, horn 2, horn 3, horn 4. And I can get much more realistic stuff that way. Actually, I did, when I wrote the music for the DNC last month, I used those brass, and they sounded really fantastic. But playing unison lines with 4 horns sounds more powerful and much more realistic than playing 4 solo horn patches simultaneously. Then I've got my low brass. Then I've got my pitched percussion. I've got a piano and, VCA for that. Then I've got harp. I've got 3 harp patches. And it's interesting, right? So I've got this harp here. Oh, wait, let me get rid of that piano. Hold on one sec. Just a solo harp. I've got a different solo harp here. Right, you hear the difference? And then I've got these harps here, which is a harp ensemble. So that's kind of cool. And then in the beginning here, I do this really something that I think is interesting is I've got this solo harp, and then I layer that with this harp ensemble. So it's interesting because the way that they played it, that they're not completely tight. So you almost get like a dum ticka da da dum ticka da da rhythm with these ensemble harps. Right? So that's sort of, right, all that sort of stuff adds attention to detail. So these are just things that you learn as you go along. Then I've got my percussion, my orchestral percussion, and then high strings, low strings. So let me just see. So on the strings, right, so I've got ensemble strings here, and I've got them all on separate tracks. Some people use something called key switching, which I don't like to do. I like to just have my individual articulations on different tracks. So I've got tremolo strings. I've got short concertinos, pizzicato strings. I've got harmonics. I've got high strings. Now this is interesting. Hold on one second. Right, so that's a performance. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a future class. And I've got upper strings legato. And then below that, I've got some solo strings, right? I've got, oh, do I? Interesting. There's no violin in there? Oh, right. Give me one second. So these are chamber violins, right? A small ensemble. And the same thing with these celli. It's a chamber ensemble. And a chamber ensemble with the basses. I had that at spiccato. Right? And the reason I like to do that is that, right, there's detail in that you don't get with the larger ensembles. And keeps, when you're doing these MIDI mock-ups, changing ensemble size really will help with keeping a person's interest. It's just like a MIDI orchestration technique. Not having everything be the same ensemble size really keeps the listener's attention. All right, so I'm going to pick up with this piece. I'm going to work through this piece next week as well because there'll be more stuff to teach from this. But I think that we're sort of reaching towards the end of the class right now. So I want to open this up for questions, and I want to give you an assignment. Have to have an assignment. So just remember, if you're going to do, if you're going to do a piano piece, just make sure that the melody is a little bit louder than the accompaniment, and you voice it that way. And if you have to go in and edit it afterwards, yeah, low, 60 side, like ground loop hums. I'm not sure if a cable will fix that. I would say that it might be the place you're living in, because I know I've got it here in my house, whereas my apartment in New York City, I had no problem with buzzing, but here in this house, I don't know what it is. I've been through the whole house and done a lot of work with the electrical stuff here, and it doesn't. There's actually a ground hum right now in my talking to you, which I can't seem to get rid of. Before I upload the video, though, I clean it out with using something called Isotope. So I would just say make sure that you've got all your electric lines not anywhere near your cables, and keep things as short as possible. Latoya.
Balanced cabling.
Yeah. Balanced cabling. And they make cables that are more insulated than others. But I don't know if, that stuff for some reason is not working here at my house. I've tried all that. Okay, so for next week, I want you to take one of the bits you wrote. Hold on. All right. So I want you to just, it's not too bad, take one of those Motivic themey things that you wrote last week, all right? And I want you to create 3 variations. And what I want you to do is very specific. I want you to start off with music and get to the motive by the end and have some sort of resolution, whether it's a cadence that ends it or a false cadence or something like that. So in other words, I don't want you to just play the motive over and over again. I want you to take that motive and figure out how to, like, in other words, you're starting the beginning of the cue, like in Batman, you're having all that murky music, and then you see Batman and boom, 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 beam, right? So I want you to figure out 3 different ways with 3 different moods to get to that motive over 30 seconds of time. I'm going to type this up and post it up onto our Google Classroom, but is that understandable, right? So you're going to write a piece of music, and you're going to take 3 pieces of music, and you're going to, the Samuel Adler book is good. Yes, I will go through orchestration, but it'll be MIDI orchestration, which is different than what you would get from a regular orchestration book. And Unai, changing ensemble sizes, right, and doing things with ensembles and solo instruments, that's part of MIDI orchestration. So there's a lot to learn about that. Make your mock-ups sound as good as possible. I mean, this piece, this one sounds really good. Let's see if I was going to... Right. So, my orchestrations sound they sound pretty good, I think. And I'm going to show you techniques how to do that, even with but I hope that you've downloaded some of those free libraries that I've suggested and installed those. That would really be helpful for getting started. Let me switch here. And I'm out of focus. Let me get back in focus. There we go. All right. So 3 30-second cues. You're going to start off, and you're going to start off at a point, and you're going to end up at that motive. And there'll be 3 different moods. You can use the same motive, and you're going to write 3 different approaches to it. Now, you could start off soft and ethereal and build to that point over 30 seconds, right? Notice how I'm not saying 8 bars. I'm telling you over a period of time. And if it ends up being 32 or 29 or 35 or 40, that's fine. But it's just an exercise to get you to think of starting out from a point and how do you get from a start point to the end point. What is that end point? It's that motive that you want to come in with. So that's, as we saw in some of the examples that we looked at today, that's a big part of scoring film. And that's a lot different than writing a big band chart, right? So just making sure I understand it. I'm going to pick one of the things that we've done to this point, that one of the motives, the short little... Right, the one that you handed in, one of the pieces you handed in this week.
Yeah, and then build up the pre stuff to the where it drops for the...
Correct, and you're going to do
drops.
three different moods, you know?
Cool.
That's just, it's a technical exercise. All these things will help you when you start writing films. These are things that it took me years to figure out how to do these things, you know, and I'm trying to impart that information to you in a shorter period of time. Undergraduates, if it's, you know, do your best. If you can't do it, you can always write me like the 150-word essay review of today's class, a summary of today's class. So... okay, so I think we started off a little rocky today, but we got into it, and I think this class ended up pretty well. And if there's no other questions, let me just look in the chat room. Great. I thank you very much, and I will see you guys next week, same time. I'll start working on your assignments and try to get you feedback by Friday this week. I think I've got my schedule down.
Thanks.
Yep. Everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy this beautiful weather we're having right now.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.